Hi. Today's class, I'll speak about whether or not aliens exist or could exist according to the Torah. Um, um, there's a letter that the Rebbe wrote to a professor, and multiple scientific things and Torah being addressed. And the Rebbe also addressed the idea of the existence of aliens according to Torah. Now, the fact that life could exist out of Earth, that is a well-established Jewish opinion. You've had opinions that the planets themselves are of intellects. You've had opinions that are on different planets, different lives in the commentators. So that's not really the matter of issue. The question is if you have life forms on outer space which can make choices, which can independently think and make choices of their own with free will. So we have animals on this earth. You could have life forms which resemble it to some degree or another, with intellects making, pseudo choices, demi choices. But life forms which could make choices like humans could. That's really what the question would come down to.
Can you give an example of those?
Like E.T.
No. Can you give an example of sources in Judaism, like the Rambam or whatever?
Yeah. Most early philosophers believe that the planets have, like the Rambam believed that the planets in Mishnah Torah.
No, I don't mean an example. Can you give an example of what they say?
Yeah, so the Rambam, the Maimonides believes that the planets themselves, the reason that they rotate is because they're intellectual beings who are praising God. So they're like bowing down or something along those lines. So end up going in circles, praising God. Also, a lot of philosophers adapted to the philosophical perspective that there's an intellect outside all the spheres, and then the intellect would come down until it trickles out to this world. We're the dumbest, so to say, of all the planets. So all the outside spheres or planets are wiser, and that, for example, is another example which is commonly understood by the philosophers. In addition, there's a verse discussing someone cursing out a planet somewhere, and according to the commentators, he's cursing inhabitants on some outside planet. So we see that there are inhabitants, or at least opinions in Judaism, and it's well established in Judaism that there is life outside Earth, or there could be life outside Earth. But this is just life forms. The fact that you have independent thinking life forms, that already challenges more of a theological issue. Why? So the Rebbe in his letter to the philosopher says there cannot be independent, free-willed life forms outside Earth. And he builds a case for this, a fairly convoluted case. He says like this. He says, free will, the reason we have free will is for Torah. If not for Torah, there is no free will. Now, why would Torah be correlated with free will? Well, this is not him saying this. My assumption is that free will in and of itself shouldn't exist. The fact that God created it demands an explanation. And we would imagine the reason God created free will is so that we can do mitzvot. We have mitzvot because of the Torah. So if not for the Torah, there is no purpose in free will, right? Now, the Torah was given on earth to humans. So if the Torah wasn't given on space, why would they have free will? Obviously, there is no being in outer space that has free will. Now you're going to ask, well, maybe there is another Torah that was given to the people and the inhabitants of another planet. So the Rebbe says that also can't be. Why? That can't be because the Torah is ultimate truth. Torah isn't just commandments, it's the ultimate truth. Ultimate truth can only exist in the ultimate form of one. You can't have two truths, you can't have five truths. You can't have a truth for one time period. Truth is always true. 1 + 1 will always be 2, everywhere. You can't have two truths. And the same revelation can't be given twice either, because that's not ultimately one either. So the conclusion the Rebbe draws is, you must say that the Torah was given on earth, for inhabitants on earth, and therefore, on a faraway distant planet, right, there can't be another life form. Now, I'm going to add, on my own volition to avoid questions, suppose there's a life form on Mars that then come in contact with Earth, right? So the Rebbe might concede that you could have planets, I don't know, you could have aliens that will eventually, make contact with us, and then they will become observant Jews or Sheva Mitzvot. That might be possible. What's impossible is on a distant planet somewhere, you have aliens who will never come in contact with us, will never have heard of the Torah, and it's impossible they had their own revelation. Yeah, does this make sense so far?
Yeah.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So, in the space is sort of like a space and time continuum. So time changes as you go through space. Your perception of time changes. And sometimes time overlap in some weird ways that I struggle to understand.
You mean
So
like when people go faster, time goes slower, that kind
Time
of a
goes
thing?
faster, time goes slower. And also maybe reality could be layered differently because our
Okay.
perception of reality is only space and time. So what if and another point, the Torah has 70 faces. So what if on another planet, simultaneously as we got the Torah here, somewhere far away in space and time, where reality is in a way that we can't even perceive it, they got a different one of those 70 faces of the Torah revealed to them at the same time as us. So it was part of the same reality, but it was sort of like a parallel sort of universe, but not really because it's still in the universe kind of thing.
Right. Oh, right. Or I can ask differently. I can ask, if there's this theory of infinite universes, right? So that would argue that you have another universe somewhere that has a Torah exactly the same way we got it, with one small difference, right?
Yeah.
Does that mean that can't exist? Right? It's to be honest, it's a fairly strange argument to begin with that the Rebbe is making, that because Torah is ultimately truth and Torah describes things on earth, it couldn't have been given differently to another group of people, because then it wouldn't be ultimate truth. It's a very strange argument to begin with, and it's also a bit strange to line out, to make it impossible for any of these theories to be true because of such an argument. But I'm not going to draw my general. I'm going to take your question more as a statement that you disagree rather than a question, right? Is that fair to say?
No, it's just opening up my, I don't know.
Right. Right.
I don't have an opinion.
Right. So with these kind of questions, I would generally. People over here probably. I know. And people over here probably already generally know my general attitude to these things. That when the Rebbe would say something like this, and you can argue and you could not argue, I would generally accept the Rebbe's position. However, in this case, it's a bit more convoluted because I'm not sure if everyone agrees with the reasoning here. If I were to reword the Rebbe's thought process here, he would say like this: the entire existence was brought into creation for one purpose, for the purpose of man, for us, right? If there's a planet somewhere that exists with inhabitants on it, which does not affect us in any way, there's no purpose in God creating it, right? That's a rewording of what he said, but that's essentially the attitude the Rebbe has. There's no reason for a planet somewhere to exist with aliens on them, right? If those aliens are not beneficial or helpful for us, right? God wouldn't have created them because God created us for us to serve him. That's his will. God doesn't need other people to serve him. And if he created them, it's obviously for us. So he created the sun so that we get light from the sun. And I guess that's essentially what it comes down to. Because if someone's going to say, well, actually, we're not the ultimate purpose of creation. Yeah, maybe there's a planet somewhere else and they're more important to God and we're secondary to them. Then this argument wouldn't really be, right? Maybe we've got the second tier Torah, so to say, right?
Can you just say again what is the Rebbe's position on this?
Rebbe's answer was this reasoning, which would result in the fact that you can't have independent, free-willed aliens.
So you're saying you could have aliens?
Yeah,
you might have aliens, but they don't have free will.
They don't have free will. There's no reason to create them with free will if not for them keeping Torah. And because Torah was given on earth, he couldn't have given them our Torah, and he couldn't have given them a different Torah because Torah is true. So this reasoning would obviously result in saying that, that there's no aliens with independent free will or thought. Right. So, now I'm rewording it. I'm rewording the Rebbe, and I'm saying that what the Rebbe means to say is that God created the world, the entire universe. Everything was created for man on earth, right? And therefore, if there's no purpose to create an alien other than for us.
And therefore
aliens with free will do not exist.
With free will do not exist.
Yeah.
Why can't you include the fact that does he say the words that aliens with free will don't exist? Or does he just say the reason?
I think he does. But even if he doesn't, it's irrelevant.
Because aliens with free will could potentially serve us, right? Could serve.
Oh yes. So I already said that I'm willing to concede that if there's an aliens on Mars, which would reach us someday, I'm willing to concede that the Rebbe would agree that such a thing could exist, because the Rebbe's argument was that, I'll give an example. You have people in Asia, right? They lived for thousands or millions or thousands of years, 2,000 years, whatever it is, before they came in contact with the Torah, right? They existed before the Torah, before they knew about the Torah. So obviously they existed because someday they'll come in contact with the Torah and they'll hear about the 7 Noahide laws, right? So the fact that something could exist for them to eventually come in contact with the Torah, right? That is fair. I think what the Rebbe means to say is that you can't have aliens on a really distant planet that will never have any connection to us. Let's say they're superior to us in knowledge. They'll never learn from us. To have a life form out there which is independent and free-willed, which is superior to us, which will never accept the Torah upon themselves, it will have no connection to us, right? Or like some people are worried about them coming to earth and then us becoming their slaves or whatever the threat is. This is the kind of thought which the Rebbe thinks cannot exist because we're the ultimate creation.
So I think that's a really important point. You don't even have to be Noahites or Jews. They could service us in some other way. Maybe they're not.
No, because then they wouldn't need free will. Then they could have been like animals. The reason humans have free will,
like the sun, like the moon, like the constellation.
Right? But the reason that humans have free will, which is unique to humans, is because humans have Torah. If not for Torah, we wouldn't have free will. We'd be like animals.
That's the argument.
So the argument here is, in order for aliens to have free will, it must be that they'll be commanded in mitzvot, and they'll serve God by mitzvot. They can't have their own mitzvot because that would be a second Torah. And Torah wouldn't be ultimately true then if we don't have the whole of it. They can't have our Torah because it's all about things on earth. Right?
I'm saying,
now, so you could always ask questions, why can't they have a Torah that says there's a planet called Earth and on Earth Jews left Egypt? You could always ask questions, right?
Right, but free will to the extent of what you mentioned, some of the philosophers say, like the Rambam and whatever, that the sun and the moon have. Yeah,
they have free will or intellect or will.
Well, whatever
the Rebbe would say,
whatever you're going to call
that's
it.
That's not free will.
Not full free will, but I'm saying intellect and whatever.
Like animals do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that
could exist. Yeah.
The Rebbe is saying could exist for sure. So it's just literally limiting. The one thing that the Rebbe limits so far from what you said is that they can't. They're not going to. There's no concern. There's no possibility
of human consciousness of free will.
But therefore, there's no possibility that they would basically come to our world, appear in our world, and be something which is against us.
Yes, that won't happen.
Thousands of light years away, that we could go there, give them a copy of the Chumash.
If that happens, the Rebbe might concede that they could exist, right? Again, Zil Basar Taima, don't follow what he says, follow his reasoning. Right? Again, in theory, all we're really ruling out here is the fact that independent life and free will can only exist for Torah. That's the bottom line. And in my rewording of it, what the Rebbe is really saying is God created the entire universe for humans, right? So why would he then want some other people to service him? Right? That's essentially. Now, again, my general attitude to these things is to accept the Rebbe because I'm Chabad and I don't really like to. Again, if scientists will come out someday and will have proof, then I'll rethink it. But as of now, it's an ambiguously scientific thing. We don't have proof this way or that way, so I'll just accept the Rebbe's position. However, it's not that straightforward from a Torah perspective either. I'm working on a work of Rabbi Jacob Antoli. He was a 13th century, he was from Provence, and he was a philosopher. The Rashba was a very big anti-philosopher, and he names him as like the worst philosopher. Don't study him, you will... So he was a Maimonidean scholar, and I think I would want to address this more in the scope of Kabbalah vs. philosophy. Because to me it seems like the Rebbe's attitude is not really... The argument he's making is more of an emotional argument than a strict Jewish theological argument. He's saying, Judaism says we're the most important, the world was created for humans, why would there be aliens somewhere? That's really what, in my mind, he's saying. And I want to see if, because that seems like a very Kabbalistic-based argument, that the whole world was created for the humans, the universe, and that's all that matters. The Torah, you read the Chumash from a Kabbalist perspective, you'll see, God created the world. Why? Abraham. Why? Exodus. Why? So we serve God. We don't even enter Israel in the Chumash. It's just our quest to enter Israel, Jews as a nation, to accept God and mitzvot. So if that's Judaism, it seems very counterintuitive for there to be an alien somewhere, and God created them for them to serve Him. Oh, so they have their own story, we have our own story. That's essentially the attitude. I'm not sure if the philosophers would agree with this. So Rabbi Jacob Antoli, he's writing, whenever you have an object, let's say a cup, right? What makes a cup a cup? What makes it what it is? Well, there are four things. There's the material it's made of. So in this case, it's paper, very green. There's the shape of the cup, right? Which shape of the cup, if it was different shape, it wouldn't be a cup, right? There's someone who created the shape. There's an external force to it, right? So that's the third. Then there's the deepest one of all, which is the function of a cup, the purpose of a cup. If you've got a cup with this shape, with this material, and a person who made it this way, but it's not made but people can't drink from it, let's say it's got a hole on the bottom or whatever it is, if it can't fill a function of a cup, then it's not a cup. The purpose. This is the deepest one of all four. God created the world in Bereshit, right? So there is the material the world's made from. right? That would be intellect or whatever the philosophers at the time believed. Then there's the shape of it. God in 6 days shaped that into the way it is. Every day he changed it and added until you get the shape of the universe. There's the external force, which is God, right? Then there's the deepest of all, which is the purpose and function of the world. What is the function of the world? So Rabbi Jacob Antoli presents two options, right? The first option would be an Aristotelian perspective. Aristotelians believed the earth always existed. And the earth, people on earth itself, being the lowest form of intellect, has no real value to God, kind of a thing. Right? God is not connected to the world. The Maimonides and Moreh Nevuchim criticizes this thought very much. So what's the function? So he says, well, there's a circular function. This is the argument Rabbi Antoli presents. Plants exist for animals. Animals exist for humans. Humans exist to water the plants. So you've got function for each independent thing, right? But it's a circular, so everything has a function. And therefore, everything has all four. They've got a force, they've got a creator, they've got... he happened to not believe in a creator, Aristotle, but he believed that God runs the motions and the spheres and the ultimate, but he didn't believe he believed the earth was eternal. But everything has a circular cause, right? So great, you've got a function for the earth. But for Jews, that answer wouldn't suffice. Why? Because we believe the universe came into being. So even if the cup has a function, the bowl has a function, everything has a function, mere existence itself doesn't have a function. Why do we exist? If the universe is eternal, it doesn't need a function, right? Or similarly, some of the commentators on Moreh Nevuchim, right, they explain that sometimes the function of something can be what it is itself. Like, for example, no one asks, what is the function of a heart, of an arm? Its function is the fact that it is a part of a collective. It's a part of the body, right? So even if a heart wasn't to pump blood, or a second kidney is not doing anything of function, its function is to be there in the body. Its place in something is the function. But if universe at whole was created, you can't ask what is the function of the universe. It's not a part of anything. That's the entirety of universe. So a tree, its function is as a part of universe. It could have just been a mere accident, and it could have a function as it is a part of the universe. But you can't ask, well, you don't need a purpose for the universe. God created it, right? So he says that there must be an ultimate function for everything, which is God's will, which we'll never understand. He quotes the Maimonides on this. Maimonides has a similar perspective. Maimonides writes, everything on earth was created for humans. So he says you've got plants. Why were plants created? For humans to eat. What about poisonous ones? For ink. Everything has a function for humans. Now in Moreh Nevuchim he explains that this is not true about other planets. Other planets are way smarter than us. Because the way intellect trickles from the active intellect through the spheres, we get the most diluted version of intellect. So if we're the dumbest planet, right, it would be absurd to say that the sun, which is so much smarter than us, was created to give us intellect. But Mars was created so that we get intellect from him. He says it's like this, think of a shepherd somewhere, right? And the shepherd, he says, you know why the king exists? So that my cattle are going to be kept safe. So there's an entire country around me, and people working, you've got ministers, and then finally a king. And then if anyone steals from anyone else, he gets put in jail or killed by the king. All that exists so that my sheep are going to be guarded. You'd say that's absurd. The king is so much greater than you. He was created to keep your sheep safe. That's absurd. Now, in Chassidut, often this is quoted in regards to the higher worlds, Atzilut, Bria, Kabbalistic spheres. And Chassidut rejects this. Chassidut, the Kabbalistic perspective is, in Yiddish we say, Punkt verkehrt. Yeah, the exact opposite. Yes, the greatest worlds, which are so much greater than you, were created to dilute everything for us because we have free will. Right? So God created higher worlds and low and a certain system of what we call in Kabbalah Tzimtzum, right? Diluting godliness for us for the lowest world. The philosophers weren't willing to accept such an argument, and the philosophers believed that to say that the reason other planets exist are for us is absurd. So then so the Rambam writes like this, okay, so let's say everything was created for us. Why were we created? So at the end of the day, anyways, you have to result to God created the universe so that we worship him because he wanted, or whatever irrational explanation, which we won't understand as humans, right? So the same way we were created to service him, maybe the planets were created to service him, right? The fact that they're smarter than us, it's absurd to say they were created for us. That's the Rambam's perspective. This is the first perspective Antoli mentions. The second perspective he mentions is the Kabbalistic perspective. Well, he mentions it on a philosophical point, that indeed the spheres were created for humans. However, he finishes, whichever one you want to accept from a philosophical perspective, whichever one makes more sense to you, you have to result in the idea that everything was ultimately created for God's service, to make God happy, whatever you'd like to reach him. So the Rebbe's argument seems almost absurd to me when we think about the philosopher's perspective. The philosopher would argue that for us to say that for us serving God means more to God than intellectual sphere serving God, which is so much wiser than us, why would God want a less smart being worshiping him than a smarter being worshiping him? Now, having accepted this argument, the Rebbe's argument about free will stemming from Torah, because we're the most important, that would seem completely absurd from the philosopher's perspective. Now, as everything, Gilgulim, right, and all different issues in Judaism, to me, this would come down to a debate of philosophers against the Kabbalists. The Kabbalists would argue the world was created for us, so it makes sense to say there are no aliens in other spheres. The philosopher would argue that there are very possibly aliens on a distant planet we'll never hear of, we'll never know of, and they were created to serve God the same way we were created to serve God. And the fact that maybe they're more important than us, that could be. Maybe we are the second tier. Maybe Torah is a diluted version of intellect, and not the ideal version of intellect. And I just want to finish off by even emphasizing this point even more. Rabbi Antoli writes that mitzvot and the whole Torah, the entirety of Torah, it's all secondary to the intellect and to the wisdom that comes from the Torah. If somebody's never heard of the Torah, but he reaches that, it's as though he's kept the whole Torah. The whole Torah is for this intellect. So higher spheres who are closer to the active intellect, they don't need the Torah. They've got a purer version of the divine truth and knowledge. We need the Torah. So the Kabbalist, the Rebbe, is coming from perspective, and he's saying, well, the Torah is the ultimate, and they don't have the Torah, so obviously we're the only ones with free will. The philosopher would argue the opposite. The Torah is a lesser, not a better. The Torah is a lesser. Better would be without the Torah. You have the intellect as it is. So I'd like to conclude my class here. We've got a debate between the Kabbalists and the philosophers, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, I'm Chabad, and I generally take the Chabad perspective on these things. And I think from a Kabbalist perspective, it makes sense. But this is a debate between the philosophers and the Kabbalists. Thank you.